Welcome back everybody, to the ICT SSH conference. This is a post-lunch program of the first day. At least it's a post-lunch for the people from the Europe and from the African time zones, let's say. But also we have participants all around the world, which we are very happy to host them, of course. And in today's afternoon session, we have two let's say presentation sessions and two keynote sessions. And the first one session is related to the digital humanities and arts. In this session, we have three papers. Each will be presented in 15 minutes. And the first one will be presented by Jan Miller. After that will be the Melissa Terras, and then Chammy Lau will be the last speaker in the first session. Just briefly to remind you on the rules, or to introduce it for you, the rules if you are the new one in this afternoon session, if you didn't participate in the pre-lunch session today. So all speakers should mute their microphones and turn off the camera when they are not presenting. And attendees can raise the questions in Q&A box. They can also chat in the chat box, and they can also raise the hand if they want to talk. The speakers or panelists, if they want to talk for some other presentations or to ask something, there is the unmute option for them. But for attendees also, I would like to encourage them to raise the hand, and we can unmute them, give the right to speak, and then they can raise a question for the speaker. Please respect diversity. There is the code of conduct for the conference. It's available in the participation section at the website of the conference. Who is not behaving in accordance with this code of conduct will be kicked off from the Zoom conference, of course. So the first presentation is entitled Building, Processing and Sharing 3D Programmatic Data and Archaeological Viewpoint. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Jan can start sharing his screen. The presenters are actually the authors of the papers are Ian and Thomas Fenn, Ian Miller and Thomas Fenn. Ian is an undergraduate student at the University of Oklahoma who has been working for the past 3 years on an artifact digitization project. Ian has experience in many forms of 3D scanning. However, he specializes in the techniques of photogrammetry, which can transform ordinary body photos into 3D digital objects. Particular attention has been paid to the accessibility and replicability of his work, which anyone can learn with a simple phone, camera, and computer. So we're living in the era when we can use our camera and computers to produce many useful things. So Ian, you have 15 minutes. So actually, I would suggest you to present your research in 10 or a little bit more minutes, and then to keep a couple of minutes for the questions from the audience. Ian, the floor is yours. You can turn on your camera as well if you want.
Thank you. It says that the host has stopped it, but I will whenever I'm able to. But I'll go ahead and start. So my name is Ian Miller. I did my research with Dr. Thomas Fenn, and we'll be talking about the technique of photogrammetry in this presentation. So a little bit of background about the project that we're working on. These are archaeological artifacts from modern-day Niger. This project has spanned 3 years, over 5,000 photos, and 40 models. These artifacts have been associated with metal production in the early Iron Age, so around 400 to 800 AD. The example on the left shows one that's an ingot mold. So molten copper and iron was poured into this in order to form metal technology. So Marin Day is an intermediary trade site within trans-Saharan trade. Whenever Islamic people first encountered Africa, they formed these trade networks and connected to pre-existing trade networks. And Marin Day was an intermediary trade site, or an entrepot, which means that it was a particular place that people would come together and specifically produce metal technology. So what we're doing in this project is we're taking artifacts and then we're creating 3D digital models of them. So why did we decide to do this? The first reason is that it's useful for collaborative research, especially during the time of COVID-19. It's a very expensive and difficult process to take fragile artifacts and then transport them across the globe for other researchers to use. We'll be talking about online hosting solutions that allow you to multiple researchers in multiple different locations to study the same data. The second is that it's useful for preserving culturally important information. Specifically, the Merit Day artifacts, since they're over 1,000 years old, are very fragile, which means that traditional methods of working with them can sometimes be destructive or dangerous. Lastly, is that it's useful for spatial calculations and analysis. Traditionally, the way that archaeologists find out how the volumetric measurements behind an object is they do something like pouring water, fine sand into it, and then calculating the volume of that. But since these artifacts are more fragile, we have found that a digital solution can be better. So our research questions are, can 3D digital models accurately represent archaeological data? Can these models be created in a field setting, which means at an actual archaeological site without losing model accuracy? And once these models are created, can they be shared in accessible ways while maintaining data protection? So I'll talk a little bit about the technique before we start. Photogrammetry is whenever you take a simple camera and you take photos around an object, and then you use a computer program that will manipulate these photos into a 3D model using pixel matching technology. So they'll line up similar pixels between photos and then form them into a 3D model. We chose this method because traditional ways of 3D scanning can often be very expensive and time consuming. And this is more simple and accessible, which means that anyone can do it even with a simple phone camera. So the way I'll be structuring this presentation is I'll be talking about a few different problems and solutions, and then the conclusions that we have reached about the ways to process and create data using this technique. So the first problem we ran into was masking backgrounds. Even whenever you have a relatively clean background, such as the one on the left where it's just a white backdrop, as you see in the picture on the right, there's still a lot of noise throughout. Obviously, the artifact is in the middle, but there's a lot of things that interfere with our ability to process the pixels and create a 3D model. So the first thing we tried using was different ways to solve this using software. The first software we used was Agisoft, which is a paid software. It uses proprietary algorithms to process photos into a 3D model. And the way that it masks photos, which means, as you see in the picture of the right, it's selecting only the artifact, not the background, is you do this manually. The picture on the left shows how we did this using Photoshop. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to search for other softwares. The one that we came up with that tended to work the best is Mushroom. Now, Mushroom is really interesting because it's free and open source, and it actually leads to replicable models, which is important for any kind of research, really. Whereas in Agisoft, you manually create every model, which means that it's not replicable because you'll be manually doing it. In Mushroom, you can choose specific settings nodes, which are shown in the bottom, which allows you to create the same exact model with the same set of images in the same customizable settings. So the second problem we ran into was field applicability. We wanted to be able to actually create a more non-destructive form of archaeology. Traditionally, objects are taken from the setting in which they're found and then processed elsewhere. However, we wanted to have the ability to do archaeological work at the place where artifacts are found. That way we can create a more non-destructive form of archaeology where we're not actually taking cultural information from the places in which they are found or originate. So traditionally, photogrammetry is used in a lab setting with a DSLR camera. It has very careful lighting in the background. You have a tripod so it's stable, and you take around 200 to 300 refined image sets. What we tried to do is use a phone camera in informal settings. We used only a headlamp for lighting. We just held it with our hands, and we took only 60 to 80 photographs. So can photographs taken in this setting create actual accurate models? We found that they can. Some of the solutions we found is you can use a portable backdrop to get rid of noise in the background. You can use informal scale bars to create accurate measurements. The picture below shows a typical photo in a lab setting. The scale bars there are accurate to 10,000ths of a millimeter. However, we found if you have a reference object, which you know to maybe 1/10 of a millimeter, like a pencil or a ruler, it can still be an accurate model. We've also found that creating depth of field calculations is important, which means you actually measure the distance between the camera and the photo, which allows you to tell how much of the object you will be focused on. So problem 3 is comparing models, which is where I'll talk about how accurate these field models are, kind of. But it relates to broader questions about photogrammetry and its usefulness as creating 3D models. Obviously, no model will ever be a perfect representation of the artifact given the nature of photogrammetric algorithms. The fact that they estimate where pixels are and then match them means that it's never going to be 100% accurate, because by its nature, it's an algorithm that uses estimation and hole filling in order to create these models. Because of this, it's difficult to define accuracy given that there aren't many metrics within the literature right now. However, we hypothesized that if multiple models of the same artifact across different methods of scanning them using the software and taking photos using different cameras, if all of these different models using different techniques are similar enough, then the representation is probably accurate, and this is a good method of creating data. So that brings us to the question, how do we measure similarity? The first method that we did is we took the difference between two different models that were created using different techniques. We overlaid the meshes on top of one another. A mesh is where all the pixels are connected, and we computed the differences between them. So in the histogram, we see that all of the differences are concentrated at 0. Any error is at 0.006 millimeters, which is very low. We felt that it was a negligible difference between different techniques of forming these models. Another method that we did is we took cross sections of models. So we cut them into different unique sections so we could actually look at the inside. And then once we overlaid them on top of one another, again, we saw that the differences were very small. Lastly, we did volume calculations. So we overlaid two models again, and then we took the relative height. We used relative height measurements to measure the volume inside the mesh, and we found that this measure was 99.7% similar. So that all suggests that these different techniques are able to create valid data. Lastly, I would like to talk about data sharing. How do we act? What do we do with these digital representations once we have them?
Jan, 1 minute, please. Can you complete
Yes.
in 1 minute? Yeah, sorry.
Yes, we found that Sketchfab enables online digitization with Creative Commons licensing. You can also add digital object identifiers to protect our data once we have it. We've also found we can 3D print, which allows people to visualize models. I'll really quickly go over our archaeological research conclusions. We found a wide range of variability within these, which supports that there's diverse community production taking place. So my last point, archaeological analysis can be done with 3D models, which enables you to study an object without physically keeping it. We can do this in a variety of settings and protect our data. Thank you to Dragan and the organizers in the University of Oklahoma.
Thank you, Ian, very much. So it's time for questions now. Do you have any question? Do you have any question from the audience before I introduce the next speaker? You can raise your question in Q&A. You can raise your hand. We can unmute yourself, or you can raise your question here in the chat. For me, it's interesting that we can use our, own mobile camera to produce some really useful features for this 3D modeling and some open source solutions. And I think also it can be useful also for some, cultural tourism, or how it's called, meaning to make some virtual presentation, for instance, of some museum here in, for instance, ISAD, and then that people can come from abroad, from some other countries in neighborhoods to visit my city, for instance, and to visit that museum. So just some kind of, invitation for other people. In the chat, there is one question from the Melissa. How difficult are these models to preserve?
So the digital models aren't difficult to preserve because they're data, but I assume you're talking about the artifacts themselves. They haven't been too difficult to preserve. We have had a problem that some of them crack, given that they're old and they've been used for metal technology, which means molten metals have been poured into them. So we have problems where some of them have cracked and kind of been destroyed. So we find it's useful to digitize them before they break like this.
Okay, Jan, thank you very much. I don't think we have more time for your presentation. Sorry for that, because we have other speakers also in this session. If you have any question, of course, you can contact directly Jan via his email, or contact by using the email of the conference. We will be glad to forward it and to connect you with Jan. And our next speaker is Melissa Terras. Thank you very much, Melissa, for accepting to be the part of the program. She will talk about why does the GLAM sector work with Google Arts and Culture, and she will present the results of a survey. Melissa is the professor of digital cultural heritage at the University of Edinburgh's College of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences, leading digital aspects of KEX-SS research as director of the Edinburgh Centre for Data, Culture and Society, and is a director of research in the Edinburgh Future Institute. She's also a fellow of the Helen Turing Institute and trustee of the National Library of Scotland. So, Melissa, you have a little bit more than 10 minutes for your presentation, and please leave a couple of minutes for the discussion after your presentations. And once again, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you. I'm trying to share my screen just now. Let me see if it's going to work. So can you see that? Can you tell me if you can see those slides?
Yes, I can see, but it's
That's
not
good.
in the presentation mode.
If I'm having a bit of a computer issue, so if I put it on presentation mode, my computer is going to crash. So I think if everyone can see the big slide, we'll just go with that. Sorry about that. Tech woes today. So my name is Melissa. I've been working in digital cultural heritage for the past 20 years or so. And I'm going to ask today, why is the GLAM sector working with Google Arts and Culture? And when I ask that question, I'm coming at it with any preconceived notions of this. I'm not wanting to find the negatives. I'm actually really interested in why the GLAM sector is partnering with Google, what the pros are and what the cons are. So just to remind you, Google Arts and Culture is, of course, a major aggregator of artworks from partner cultural organizations, and their mission is to preserve and bring the world's art and culture online so it's accessible to anyone anywhere. It was launched in 2011 as a Google Art project. In 2016 they changed their name to Google Arts and Culture. They started with 17 major partners. Now they have 2,000. It's one of the major online players in digital cultural heritage now. We know that over the pandemic, because they've said the volumes of people accessing library, archive, museum and gallery content through Google Arts and Culture has massively increased. We don't know to what extent. And I was just wondering, what do institutions get out of being part of this aggregator? There are other aggregators that exist, which are run by the GLAM sector. So what do institutions get out of being in this relationship with one of the major tech companies and sharing their digitized resources? Now, we have done previous work on this, and I'm working with Ina Kijner from Siberian Federal University on this research, and we did a mapping of the contents of Google Arts and Culture, and we showed that there was a massive skew towards content put up on it from the USA. So there are some biases which are emerging when we do look at Google Arts and Culture, but do these types of biases emerge when we actually talk to the institutions themselves? So what I did with this, or what we did, is actually contact individuals working within the GLAM sector to ask their opinion about Google Arts and Culture and what their experience was in utilizing this platform. I used JISC online surveys, and we had a survey online for about a month, and there were 36 questions. Crucially, we didn't ask for anybody's details, so they could feel free to tell us what they really thought, rather than actually us being able to pin down who they were and what they were, so they could tell us and be absolutely honest. And we got ethical clearance from this from the University of Edinburgh. We got 70 responses, which is really great. This is still qualitative rather than quantitative, though, given the size of the GLAM sector. But to have 70 responses, 66 in English and 4 in Russian, meant that actually there's a really rich set of discussions to pull out of this. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who took the time to fill out this survey. None of the questions were mandatory, so if some of these, if the graphs don't add up to 70 throughout the rest of the presentation, that's why. Most of the respondents were from the UK, but then we had USA, Australia, Germany, and a whole raft of different areas such as Oceania and even Qatar, so Southeast Asia. So it's worldwide, the responses that we got to this, which is great. There's a whole range of GLAM institutions, from nationals to local, mostly museums, some art galleries, a few libraries, but a rich portfolio of people responded, or their place of work responded. And when we asked what their positions were, we had everyone from digital managers right down to curators, director, archive services, library digitization services. So a whole range of people working in digital. So it was mostly people working in digital who had some experience of working with Google Arts and Culture. I asked them about the relationship with Google Arts and Culture. About 70% had been part of the relationship that the institution had had with Google. So their responses then were really insight to what it was like to upload content to the platform. Many of them had managed the institutional process. Other people had been involved in selecting material or uploading material. Most people had actually looked at other institutions on Google Arts and Culture. I think that's important. It is a shop window. People can come and look at other people and what they are doing, and keeping an eye almost on the competition. I never like to think about competitions between galleries and other cultural institutions, but looking at what other people are doing and seeing whether or not they could get their content up to that standard too. So to answer the big question, why did the institution partner with Google Arts and Culture? The major aspects of this being a positive thing for galleries, libraries, archives and museums is, of course, to promote their collections, to be part of that wider initiative, and to improve access to collections, to make sure that a wide variety of people can encounter. And it is about different encounters with cultural heritage. Another important reason was to raise the profile of the institution. So many people thought that being part of this wider initiative and partnering with Google meant that the profile of their institution would be raised and that they would get good publicity and different users, but also being part of this very modern and very now way of aggregating cultural heritage. Interestingly, only a few people got in this to get access to user analytics. And that's one of the things that people say, this will allow you to do. But this wasn't the driver. It was the promotion and to be part of the wider collections. So I'm just at the stage now of analysing all these properly and writing it up. The pandemic did a bit of a number on my childcare, so I'm a bit behind on writing up everything. I'm just going to concentrate on some themes which have emerged that are coming out of the data. The first one is this promotional benefit. People are talking about hitting people in over 60 countries. It's a good highlight reel. It's international recognition, and they're reaching an audience they wouldn't otherwise reach. And it's a really global platform. So these are all positives, and these are the reasons why institutions are putting in the resources for that. But as far as user data is concerned, people are not necessarily using the user data. People are saying they haven't seen any. The reports are difficult to analyze. They're in CSV format. It's not like Google Analytics where you can get those really smart reports very easily. You have to do the crunching yourself. And lots of people hadn't figured out what to do with the data. The ones who had learned which objects and stories users were finding most interesting, and that feedback loop was then created as to what content A should be digitized and B should be put online. However, there was a lot of discussion about labour and the choices made into who was doing the work. The institutions themselves were given the autonomy of what to choose to put up on Google Arts and Culture, but they were set very short timelines to do so. And although they had discussed responsibilities with Google, the workload wasn't discussed. And most people who were talking about workload or labour said that it was a lot of work to do this, and there was no funding available for Google to provide that. So this is institutional resources uploading thing. Google said it would be easy to export and upload our data, but it was more time consuming than that. As a result, many people used pre-existing digitized content and interpretation, and that to limit that workload, but it did take a toll on some institutions, and it was a lot more work than they thought. Another issue is licensing. So people don't really, or people haven't really got to the bottom of what this means for copyright or for giving away the rights to their collections. So there's a lot of back to and fro with legal teams. Google have been fairly inflexible with these partner institutions. And obviously some people just didn't understand the need to get the rights issues right. And there were a lot of delays in this too. Apparently the advice was that out of copyright material was best used, so that a lot of people used out of copyright material, and the whole question of orphan works and how they navigate that came up too. The process itself is fairly difficult. There was limited feedback to upload, and all the CMS was relatively easy to use. It took some getting used to. And there's some issues about color reproduction actually, and how the images that get put up are reprocessed, which really needs to be looked at further. An issue of sustainability was also risen. How long will the content be up there? So whether or not we can trust that this will be up there long term, whether or not institutions have to take things offline, whether or not institutions choose to take things down, or whether or not people have the resources to take things down, and what is Google doing with the data that it has uploaded already. There's a huge amount of other issues coming out here. I only have time to go into a few things today, but the individuals who took part of this process did say it was good for their professional development. They said it was interesting to gain insight into Google, into a tech giant, and to look at how their website intersected with the likes of Google Arts and Culture. So changing how institutional websites run. They didn't know if there were resources to maintain this digital portal. They didn't know if there were resources to maintain the relationship. There was no community between different institutions, no forum for people to talk to each other, and that would have been useful. There were concerns about monetization. There were concerns about ethical issues in partnering with Google, and comments such as museums should be more savvy to Google's actual ambitions in accessing the metadata, images, and audience engagement from our institutions. So advice for others: think very carefully about how you're going to measure the impact. Think about why you're putting up certain objects, and don't give away all of your collection for free. Invest in your own web presence and talk to other institutions that have already done it. When I asked people what 3 words they would associate with Google, the main one was access. Interesting and access. Fun, big, slick, colorful data, powerful, useful. But many people brought up these ethical issues and trying to understand what Google was actually doing. So future work, I'm going to be interviewing 10 to 15 individuals about their use, again, anonymous. If anyone wants to do that, drop me a line, transcribe these, I'll analyze these, and I'll be writing up the survey and the interviews by the close of 2021. There's a lot more to do here to look about the relationship of Google and commercial providers to GLAM institutions. We have to encourage a multitude of voices, and we have to encourage a multitude of critiques to ensure our culture is represented online. And finally, we really have to ensure that institutions look after their collections in the digital space and can help shape and control the messaging they put out regarding them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa. So the questions, you can raise your questions in Q&A box or in the chat, or you can just raise your hand. You already heard for the invitation from Melissa to cooperate together in some interview. I hope this Google Arts and Cultural Service will exist in the future. I noticed some fear of the respondents that it could just stop to serve, but
yeah, I think Google has a habit of turning off services with very little notice, and there's a fear that that will happen too, and there's a huge amount of work to upload all this content onto it. So there's no promises about sustainability. And I guess when people have their own content management system, they can choose when things are maintained or how they're maintained. So it is a problem. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think, you know, the world is somehow going in that open direction, meaning that everything is trying to be the open and discoverable and findable. Yeah. And probably Google helps there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's fair, especially, you know, if things have been licensed to be open, is absolutely fine. Google could have taken them anyway and put it online. So working in partnership's a good thing. And again, I'm not here to necessarily criticize Google. I'm actually interested in that discussion and at what it's doing for partners. And I think that actually partnering rather than just taking is very important. And we have to explore what it means to make collections open. And we have to explore what this actually means, because if you do license your collection CC0, people can do what they like with them. And this is one of the things, like a big tech can take them as well as individuals taking them. So we have to be very careful. That's what we want when we license things.
Yeah. Okay, Melissa, thank you very much once again for accepting to be with us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, it was very interesting for me, to be honest. I'm not so much in this aspect, but it sounds as an interesting survey and research, of course. Now we're going further with the program. So if you have any question for Melissa, Melissa already invited you to contact her via email. You also, if you forgot her email, you can just send an email to the conference, official conference email, which you can find at the conference website, and we will be glad, of course, to just contact you with the Melissa. And the last one presentation in this session is actually the paper entitled "Transforming Cultural Tourism Experience into a Digital Space: A Case Study of Virtual Museums in Asia." The authors of this paper are Chammy Lau, Pamela and Helen Wong, and the paper will be presented by Chammy Lau, who is a tourism researcher. Her research interests include festival tourism, tourism impact studies, sustainable tourism development, and transport geography. Dr. Lau is a lecturer in the Division of Business and Hospitality Management, College of Professional and Continuing Education of the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, which is located in the Hong Kong. So Chammy, you can unmute yourself and start sharing your screen. You have 50 minutes in total for your presentation, but please try to present in 12 minutes or something like that to keep a couple of minutes for questions.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. Sorry, one moment. Let me try to share my screen first. Share. Yes.
We can see your web browser at the moment, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So can you see my PowerPoint slide now?
Not yet. I am still seeing your web browser.
Oh, browser, web browser.
Yeah, and the conference website of the conference is open at the moment.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that. So
maybe you selected just to share the web browser. You know, if you stop sharing and click again, share screen, there should be the options what you want to share. the complete screen or the certain application, for instance, PowerPoint?
Yes, can you see the PowerPoint here?
Yeah, we can see it now, but it's now in the full mode. Yeah, okay, perfect.
Thank you so much. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to share my research work with you all. So I have changed my topic a little bit. So later on, you will know why. So the topic here is transforming cultural tourism experiences into a digital space. It's a case study of virtual heritage sites in Hong Kong. So due to the pandemic issues, unfortunately, we have not a very good year since 2020. So in terms of the tourism performance for the tourism sector, we have fewer international arrivals. So we all know this is a fact. So it affected a lot of World Heritage sites, including museum and also those outdoor physical sites. So proposed by the World Tourism Organization, they would like to introduce a new promotion called promoting the sustainable and inclusive economic growth this year, or perhaps later on in the next few years. So for cultural tourism, this definition is broad, but here, as far as I understand, we can classify them into the cultural participation or cultural motivation. It is very difficult to distinguish whether the tourists really pick up a site because of the cultural attraction. So usually they use the participation or the activity engaged to name it as a kind of, as a form of cultural tourism. So under the World Tourism Organization member state, about 84% of them believe that cultural tourism play a major role, particularly they are in the marketing or promoting a destination. So it is well under the master plan of the tourism policy. So now, how can we use the ICT, the technology, the communications technology to enhance the cultural tourism or the destination? So according to the current literature, we understand that they have produced a lot of 360, 3D or 4D or 5D videos. They just post it in the YouTube or launch it in their the NTO, the website like that. And also there are some of the research focusing on evaluating the impacts and the effects on the tourist behavior by introducing different kind of ICT. For example, the Google Earth, for example, the one just mentioned by Melissa previously. So what is the effects about it? And also sometimes they use it as on-site visitor attractions management. So for example, the crowd management during the peak hour, peak season, or how can they reduce the number of tourists during the peak hour? And also they will use some of the ICT technology to educate the visitors for fulfilling some educational purposes. So, but for the, as far as I understand, I think that there's some research gap between the ICT technology and empathetic relationships for the tourism experiences. So what are they? For example, the visitor engagement and the visitor enjoyment. So I think it is much more important, especially now after the pandemic issues. So the people is more engaged with tourist heritage sites. They may somehow affect their emotional or psychic effects, especially for the outdoor cultural heritage sites. So for the museum, for those indoor one, they have a lot of technology investment by the government in some sense. But for outdoor cultural heritage site, perhaps we can have more attention on it, especially in the future after all the travel restriction released it. So here I would like to use an example in Hong Kong to share with you what have been done just this year, launched in March 2021. So my research objective, try to evaluate these ICT apps, especially for the outdoor cultural heritage. So you may argue with me, Hong Kong is such a modern metropolitan pace. So what are the cultural heritage? I'm sorry, it is not listed, but still there is some heritage. It is worthwhile to have a more in-depth understanding what we did in this part of the world. So since 2021 March, so the Hong Kong Tourism Board, Hong Kong Tourism Commission, that means the government, they introduced the AR markers. They try to introduce these AR marker. It's not a QR code. I'm sorry, you have to download the apps prepared by those professional people. And then once you scan these AR apps, you can have a lot of information and animation that you can do with this particular cultural heritage building or sites. So let me show you just a 2 minutes video for this interesting innovative ICT methods done in my place.
City and Time.
Chammy, sorry, can you stop the video?
That uses cutting-edge multimedia and augmented reality technologies.
Chammy, we can't see your video, so because you shared only the PPT file.
Created by City University of Hong Kong.
Really, you cannot see it?
City and Time
No, we
brings
can't,
Hong Kong's
unfortunately.
extraordinary history back to life by transforming.
So your web browser is not shared. You shared only the PowerPoint, you know. And if you clicked on some link, and if you have to stop sharing your PowerPoint and then to start sharing your web browser if you want to, that we can see.
Oh, I see. Sorry, that one moment.
Yeah, and I think it's even possible in the Zoom to share the complete screen. So meaning whenever you change the application, we can see.
Oh, sure. Yeah, one moment. Let me go back first.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. So yeah. Sorry for the technical issues, huh? So how can I go back? Resume share. Yes. So I'm here. Stop sharing. New share.
No, you're still sharing the screen. I mean, in the Zoom, there is the share screen option, the green one. Maybe it's on the top of your screen, green one option. And then you should stop sharing your screen, and then you should start sharing your screen, but the complete screen, not just one application.
Yes. Yeah. So I can.
City and Time is a tourism project that uses cutting-edge multimedia and augmented reality technologies.
Yeah, now we can see that. Yeah.
By the Tourist Commission.
Sorry about that.
And created by City University of Hong Kong. City and Time brings Hong Kong's extraordinary history back to life by transforming smartphones into magic augmented reality windows that contrast 360-degree panoramic images of old Hong Kong with today's surroundings. This is how we created this project. Firstly, we did 360-degree laser scanning at selected locations in Hong Kong. These laser scans were then converted into panoramic 3D models. After deciding on a historical moment for each of the locations, we sourced archival photographs showing the buildings and features that would be seen in the reconstructed panorama. These photographs were then matched and textured onto the 3D models. Using the photographic textures as a reference, renowned Hong Kong artists created new painterly textures that were applied to the 3D model. Lastly, our app development team integrated these panoramas with other features, including sound effects, animated objects and figures, selfies, and social media. Our app development team also engineered the augmented reality function of this project so that our virtual historical panoramas can be enjoyed on location and compared with today's scenery. To achieve this augmented reality experience on location, we completely redesigned a number of existing directional signs for visitors. The new City and Time signage pole consists of redesigned, colorful and laser-cut signage panels solar power panel, and a circular clock-like augmented reality marker. It is this augmented reality marker that lets your smartphone match the position of the historical panorama with today's surroundings. Visitors can experience City in Time at various designated sites in Hong Kong, either via an app or the web. You can also enjoy City in Time off-site.
Yes, so let me finish it. Let's go back to my PowerPoint screen. So can you see my PowerPoint screen here?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you so much. So this is, oh, sorry. Let me finish. Let me stop the some nice background music.
Yeah.
So here is the apps, yeah, proposed by our Hong Kong.
Yes, but you stop sharing your screen. Sorry, now we can't
Uh-huh.
see the PPT file. Sorry.
Yes. So it is apart from the on-site experiences, definitely you can use the off-site. That means through the website you can experience this. Can you see it now? Can you see the screen now? Sorry.
Yeah. Yes, we can.
Yes, sorry about that. So so my research is try to use these newly introduced apps in my city. So I would like to collect the views, okay, from those visitors. So here it is the website. You can also do it in your place. I'm sure you can access it, although you're not so familiar with the location. But to me, I really physically go to that particular site. Here's the peak. And then I scan the AR code. And on the screen, you see that there's an icon called I. So I click it, immediately the short description about this site. And also I take a selfie mode. So it is a kind of games that to involve, engage the visitors. So what is the use or the value of using these or introducing this app? Definitely, I think it is from a historical perspective, geography, visual arts, humanities, social science, of course, tourism. So I believe that these apps can contribute to our field of research. And together with the lively animations, not just comparing the past and the present and the current surroundings, but actually they give a lot of information to the visitors. Even though myself, I'm not so familiar with that kind of different kind of mode or history in that particular place. So my methodology for conducting this research is try to use the questionnaire. But unfortunately, the response rate is not so good because of the pandemic issues. Some of the students may not be so engaged. And also one of my requirements is ask them to really use these apps, okay, to play with these. After they play with these games, they complete the questionnaire. But there is several parts in my questionnaire, which is more academic. We call it emotional connections, cognitive response after doing this app, and what is the sensory fidelity, what are their heritage experiences. So it is a very long, comprehensive. Perhaps I need to set it as a compulsory, put it in the computer lab later on in the new semester. I can collect more data to reflect or to understand what is the perceived idea about these, the value of using this app. So also I have asked them two questions. What is the level of understanding about the VR, AR technologies for learning or for the future use in the industry? And also I would like to ask what are their engagement about the understanding about the cultural side, whether they're actively participating or whether they're actively seeking the information. Definitely, for different students from different programs or disciplines, they may have a different response. I think it is worth to do more comparisons for their response. So my preliminary result here, I confirms that the immersive technology, that means the VR and AR, can stimulate the emotional connection. As far as I can observe from the pilot data, is around 50s. Okay, they all ranked it as a very good mean for those question answered. And also, we believe that technology will be the future trend, enhancing the visitor engagement and enjoyment. Because when I asked the student to play with it and then to come back to my class and then to share with their understanding, they're quite positive. They feel it's a very good platform for them to learn of the history class and the geography class and tourism class. So I think the contribution is it provides empirical evidence, right? And also perhaps other cities, no matter in Asia or in any other part of the world, may try to use it instead of just listening to the audio guide on a hop-on, hop-off bus. I think it is good for doing these kind of new ideas. So I recommend the government may try to do these new technology to sustain the cultural heritage in the digital era in the future. Thank you so much. That's all for what I presented today.
Yeah, Chammy, thank you very much. We have one question in the chat box and one in Q&A. Just briefly, if you can provide some response. From the chat, there is a question, is the code for the City in Time application available as open source? So I suppose it's related to the code you presented also in the YouTube video, meaning that we can come to the Hong Kong and, you know, put our camera from the mobile phone to some building and then receive some information additional about that building. So is that open source software which we can apply and customize for our cities or something? Is that?
I think it may not be an open source in this moment. It is AR apps funded by the government and developed by one of the university local. So it is, but the website, you can go there, just I project it and you can play with it at home. But if you can physically go there, then it will be have a more, you can compare the past and the current surrounding immediately, because on the web, you cannot compare it. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So I'm sure this is the first stage, or you know, it's really developed, introduced in March. Later on, I believe they will have a more interesting, interactive way, because for the 3D video on YouTube, it is one dimension, yeah, without any interactive things to engage the visitor.
Yeah, thank you very much. And there is one question, is Q&A from the Shemuel Yerushalmi. I want to ask you, according to your opinion, tourism based on digital technologies as a virtual tourist, whether it will change a traditional form of tourism and travels. And it's have a large actuality today because of the COVID and other crises at the moment. So do you think that people will stop traveling and just enjoy in this virtual traveling, or it should be just some kind of advertising for the people to come there and to enjoy really in the city and or some any
I think, yes, I think in the short term, the people may not be may not be able to go back to the past, okay, just the normal era. So, but after a few years, after they have accumulated that kind of a digital experiences at home, perhaps the expectation will go further. So when they visit the site, then they have a different kind of expectation. So I think it's now better to get well prepared for the infrastructure. So I think, and also it is kind of very good promotion. So this time you come to this destination, you have some new things, not just the basic infrastructure, but it is another enhancement of the supplement or the extra things that you can enjoy to play with on site.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm also looking forward to start traveling again after this. Yeah, because I really like to travel, and I hope also other people are looking forward to that. And my impression is that those virtual conferences are also somehow, people are tired of those virtual conferences, and hopefully the next year the conference will be some kind of hybrid conference or maybe even physical conference. Thank you very much for your presentation. This session was what we have in mind when we decided to organize this conference. Actually, it's really some kind of application of ICT technologies on some social aspects or social sciences and so on.